I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor at Gold Derby, here with Daisy Ridley. Daisy, Young Woman in the Sea is such a crowd pleaser. And a
Mm.
huge reason for that, I think, is because it balances really high stakes adventure with deeply personal storytelling. I was just wondering what about this story most resonated with you personally?
I mean, I loved the script first and foremost. I'm a big fan of Jeff, and then I'm a big fan of Jerry, so the whole collaboration was unbelievable, but this script felt so, as you say, personal and so centered on this wonderful family, and then, of course, has the scope of the feat of swimming the channel. But those relationships in the family particularly, I've never played a sister before, so getting to do that on screen when I have 2 sisters and my sisters are so important to me, that felt so wonderful. So building that relationship with Tilda, which was very easy because she's wonderful, um, and having Jeanette play our mother in it, who's really the bedrock of the family, and Kim play our father, who is going through his own difficulty. He is still a man of that time, and he is still overcoming his own biases, I suppose, but the fact that they all love each other more than anything. And also for me, what was so appealing is the sort of psychological journey that Trudy goes through in terms of needing her family there in order to succeed. What Trudy really did 100 years ago was extraordinary and broke barriers for women in sport and has largely been forgotten. But she did have an amazing support system around her. So the fact that this film honors her and honors the people around her feels really special to me.
Yeah, I love it when Henry's played by Kim Bodnia at the end of the film. He's like, this is my daughter, and I taught her how to swim. It's such a beautiful moment. I love that whole family dynamic. It's an angle that I don't
Yeah.
think enough people have really been talking about. It's very much central to the whole story, I think. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, director working running told me recently that you trained for half a year to prepare for production on the film, which makes sense. It's going to be out in the open sea. That's a huge challenge. And then you did all of that with a fear of the ocean. Is that true?
Mm. So the bit about it being half a year, no. I did 3 months training, and then because we were filming for 3 months and I was still training from start to
Mm,
finish, it was 6 months training.
that's a
Uh,
lot.
yeah, yeah. And I am not a fan of the open water, which I had told them, and I think everyone thought I was joking and I was being dead serious, but I wanted to play the role. So I was like, I'll do it. I just am scared. And I couldn't, the first time I did a swimming session with Siobhan Marie O'Connor, our amazing Olympian who trained me, I couldn't do the full 20-meter swim. I stood up halfway and thought, oh my God. But it felt in such a small way. I mean, I was overcoming things and we did the big swim at the end of the shoot. So we had already shot the entirety of the film bar the open water work. So I was knackered going into it and scared. And physically I knew it would take its toll, but it also, firstly, it wouldn't have looked as good as it does if it wasn't for real out on the ocean. Um, but also I felt in a strange way, even though I was doing 5% of what Trudy actually did, it sort of connected me to her in a way even more. That feeling of, I would look around me and I was surrounded by wonderful people who were supporting me. Stephen Graham, Kim Bodnia, Tilda were on the boat in the scenes with me. And then I had the support boats on the other side. But it's, for any open water swimmer, it's incredibly isolating. It's just you and the sound of your own breath and the blue. So those two, it felt quite art imitating life in the performance, and Trudy's journey is so much about Trudy and this swim, but she's surrounded by these wonderful people. I was surrounded by these wonderful people. And I just knew going into it, I couldn't complain because I knew that would not work for me. So I knew it was something to be overcome. And watching the film, there's just no way we could have done it any other way. So I'm thrilled, even though it was tricky, I'm thrilled that we did it that way.
Yeah. I mean, the film comes off really real and tactile. It doesn't look computer generated. You didn't swim in front of a green screen for most or
Mm-mm,
all of this journey, especially in the latter half of the film.
mm,
And I always wonder when someone's doing something so physically challenging, what kind of toll does a day out at sea off the coast of Bulgaria, what kind of toll does that have on a person physically and mentally? And how did you get through those periods of time during production?
Mentally, it was something that I think I didn't realize was as heavy as it was until afterwards. Playing someone so confined by the world around her. And of course, 100 years doesn't feel too long ago, and we've made a lot of leaps forward, but we haven't progressed as far as we should have. I think it was afterwards I realized how tense it is to play in a world that is for women. And certainly in the household, there was so much freedom, but it was actually also something we spoke about. Trudy at home versus Trudy out in the world are two very different people. There's a real sense of comfort in the home. And then out in the world, there is so much that's overwhelming that there is quite a distinction for her in how she carries herself in the wider world, and then the trust that's built with the people that she trusts in that world. I mean, physically, I got quite injured, pulled something and was like, I actually don't know how we're going to finish this job. But it's knackering. I think there's something about the breathing of swimming that's quite meditative in a way and quite calming. But the end of every day was, I mean, by the time it got to the last bit of the shoot, me, Tilda, Siobhan, and Stephen were living next to each other. So we'd go back to the hotel. I'd usually make dinner. We'd eat, watch something terrible on TV and go to sleep. There was not much happening beyond vegging and getting ready for the next day.
Ugh, the vegging though can be so therapeutic and just turn
Oh,
that brain.
so good. Yeah.
Ah, glorious.
Yeah.
You know what really took me aback is actually the end of the film has some real footage from that time.
Mm,
Of course, most of us, I had never heard of her, which is so
mm,
sad, really. It's awful. I'm so glad this film is out there now and we can remember what she did. But what she did for women's sports and the
mm.
welcome that she received and the applause she received in New York was really something to behold. How do you feel about um, bringing her into the spotlight, being part of this project? Does that make you feel, I guess it makes, of course it makes you feel good, but what are your thoughts on doing that and being part of that?
It feels, I remember my dad actually saying a few years ago, he was watching The Post, I think, and he said, you know, some films, the story is more important than the film almost, um, which I don't think is necessarily true for all things. And certainly he didn't mean it in any other way, but that it was a very important story to tell. But with this, it feels like the importance of the story is undisputable. And certainly coming into it, I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what she did. And the response genuinely from everyone has been, I cannot believe I didn't know who she was. And of course, in history, women have been forgotten in many ways. But what she did and what she went through to do it, the fact that she was poisoned, they didn't believe that she was poisoned, the fact that her sister created the first ever bikini, these details that should feel known aren't known. It ended up feeling like we set out to make a great film that people were enjoying. And then on top of that, the fact that we are honoring her is really wonderful. And Jeff certainly had been in touch with, because she didn't have children, but Meg did. So there are a few relatives that Jeff had been in touch with. And they are really thrilled at what this film does and how it honors her.
I can imagine there would be. And just thinking through the process of portraying a real life person that isn't very well known, how do you approach the role with such little information that you likely had to understand what kind of person she was?
That actually, I think was the best bit for me. There was some footage of her. So weirdly, we knew how she swam. I mean, not weirdly, but that was one of the things that's really recorded. So we knew how she swam. So I actually matched her stroke. That was something I really could do. And there are a few clips of her speaking, but not really. So for me, it was a really wonderful exercise in honoring the sort of the her in a sort of spiritual way, but in a realistic way, figuring out the best way to tell this story and the points of the story that Jeff has chosen to explore for this film, because of course this ranges a number of years. So creating those family relationships, and of course we know that the family was very important to her, but it was a slightly different setup for real. But being able to create those relationships and imagine what those relationships were like was so joyful to me. I've never played a real person sort of really having to follow historical accuracy, as it were. So for this to be me playing someone real, but having all of that room to play, I think was a really great exploration for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. It would have been so rewarding. You know, you've played some really amazing roles over your career, but yeah, I could just imagine. I think this is some of your best work, to be honest. And I found actually the scenes where your performance is non-verbal, and so where Trudy's state of mind, her emotional well-being are being conveyed through your physicality and your facial expression. From a technique point of view, Daisy, how do you typically approach scenes where your character is battling the elements in her isolation, her pain, her discomfort, but you don't really have the benefit, I suppose, of using verbal cues? You have to do it all on your face and in your physicality. Is that more challenging, and or is it something that you actually really love?
Well, it's interesting because I've never actually played anyone that speaks loads. Um,
True, that
so
is, yeah.
yeah, and I mean sometimes I think about dying, perfect example. Speak very, very little.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've never approached it differently. I was told, it's funny, I was talking to the students at SCAD today, and one of my best pieces of advice I was ever given by a director was the camera's a mind reader. And that's something that's always been very comforting to me, because if the camera is capturing you and you're doing everything that the character is doing, you're thinking everything the character is thinking, one would hope that that translates. And certainly with this, there is so much going on with her and so much that she can't express, that getting that to play that very rich inner life was wonderful. And actually the scene I remember really loving doing, but I was so nervous about doing it, was a scene with Stephen, who plays my coach in it. And it's really the first time in the film that Trudy says what she wants, with
Mm.
no questions, with no interference from anybody. She has told her family what she wants to do. She has expressed interest in swimming the channel. But I remember that scene feeling so present, because so much of it, she is holding on to these feelings, and there are things that she could never tell her family. She could never tell her family, I'm either doing this or I'm dying. So then having that scene with Stephen felt like such a culmination of so many different moments of her being hesitant to express those feelings, and then having him to have that real verbal decision of, this is what I'm doing and no one's stopping me. So it felt like a really beautiful journey to that point. But generally, no, I feel like I approach things similarly, I guess, whether it's dialogue heavy or very quiet.
You know, in all of my years of speaking to actors, I've never heard someone say the camera is a mind reader. That is
Good.
brilliant. I love it. Yeah, I love that. I really do. I think it's
Interesting.
so true. It's so
Yeah,
true.
I mean, something I was told on my very first TV job. And I remember Joss, who told me, the director of the TV show, I remember him saying it, and it was like a light bulb moment.
Yeah. Great
Mm.
example is, you know, the moment for me, I'm sure most people, prior to her swim to the shore, swimming at night, the
Mm,
orchestra swells and then it
mm.
stops and you turn around. Ooh, that was very, very satisfying. Talk me through that. If you can recall that day of filming, you're probably in a
Yes.
tank there because it was at night.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, well, that was a great moment, and it really has to pay off for us, the audience. We want that so
Mm.
badly, and it delivers. So talk me through that.
I feel like Yoakum did such a beautiful job, and Oscar, our DP, of really being with Trudy. So the audience is really with her in a way that the other characters aren't. Her mum's at home. She doesn't know what's going on there on the shore. And there is obviously a moment where she is lost in a sort of on screen, as it were. But that scene, yes, the only things we did in the tank were nighttime because it was dangerous. And
Yeah.
strangely enough, it was more difficult in some way. It was more difficult to stay afloat in the tank because you don't have the buoyancy. So I was struggling harder to stay upright. And of course, doing the prior bit to that, which is she actually going to make this, was again really difficult because I was panicking in a way. When you're acting the panic takes you. So I had all of that. And then that moment, what I remember is picturing Jeanette's face, actually. So it was set up, so I knew where the lights were and I knew what the fires were. But for that whole sequence, because we did it in sort of chronological not one take, but in one sort of swell. I remember just picturing Jeanette's face because I had worked with her by that point and knew how unbelievable she was. Even it's such a strange thing. It's the first time I think I've ever really had this, but I knew that her scene in the radio station was going to be so powerful that was spurring me on, which was a very strange thing, but I could just picture her and I knew how evocative and how emotional she would be. And because we had built such a beautiful bond by that point, it was really strange. It was like my mum's face mixed with her face in a very strange way. So I remember that feeling of panic prior to that moment of, oh my God, this can't be it. And all the other things, all of the difficulties, all of the journey, and her sister and her dad waiting on shore, this can't be it. This can't be the end. And then that turn and feeling the light and sort of sensing the people there and the turn and just the utter relief that she's not lost and she's going to make it. And of course, it's an interesting role when you're playing someone that you know is going to succeed.
Yeah.
Because
Well, we know.
everyone comes into the film and goes, well, we know she does it. So the drama is, how does she do it and why does she do it? And in that moment, which is the closest she gets to not being able to complete it, that film, even that moment, even doing it, felt so powerful. And then of course with Amelia's score, I mean, come on, it was just gorgeous. And then when we were doing it in the sea and I could see what was ahead of me and what would be there, I mean, again, that feeling of being overtaken by what I was really witnessing was just stunning.
Yeah, it's a great moment, and Jeanette really sells it as well, obviously.
Mm.
So final question is going back to Joachim Ronning, the director. He said to me as well that very few people could have ended up doing what you were able to do physically in this movie while being in the ocean, day in, day out, delivering profoundly emotional performance while also being tested physically. And I just wondered then, in a film like this, the relationship between the leading actor and the director must be, it's just so critical. What did you most value about your collaboration with him and what he was able to bring out of you?
I think what is amazing about Joachim and why he really was the perfect captain for this ship is he does love so much the intimacies of a familial relationship. And then of course we know he can do scale and fun as well. There's so much fun in this film and his movies, all of those things together. I mean, and obviously you can go, oh, we knew we needed it. I didn't know we needed it. In hindsight, we needed it. Those two things working beautifully together. And actually, I feel like coming into this, I was concerned, to be honest, about the fact that I was playing someone who wanted to do something and did it. I was genuinely questioning him as to how to make us feel with Trudy and for us to understand her journey when it seems in a general way to be so point A to point B. And what it ended up being was a series of small hurdles that she's overcoming. And often things are coming that she wasn't aware of, but it ended up feeling like sort of week by week, there was a moment in her journey that was the overcoming. And so being guided by someone who was sort of unshakable in that when I was going, was fantastic. And one of the scenes I really remember, actually, because I had tested with a few people for my sister before, there are those scenes that you do and you've already done them, and then you come to film and you think, oh no, am I going to be able to do them? And actually, one of the scenes was the alleyway scene with Tilda, when, I mean, to my mind, it is Trudy's lowest point. She's gone away, she's been incredibly lonely, she's been fearful for the first time, and that was something I really wanted to make clear, that it wasn't just that she couldn't physically train at the Olympics, she did not have her support system, and psychologically she couldn't overcome that hurdle. So coming back and confronting her sister and finding out all of this stuff, and suddenly her sister's telling her that maybe it's not possible, and her sister's really her North Star. So that was a big scene that I remember being really nervous coming into, because me and Tilda had already done it. And then having space and having time, and Jochen going, it's fine. We have the time, we have the space to do it. And then, of course, once you're there and me and Tilda are going, it was just so beautiful. But he was so solid in those moments where it felt insurmountable almost. And I think his eye for the smallest detail and the biggest scope have really married beautifully for this movie.
Yeah, you're spot on. It really humanized her, and it just made me so desperately want her to succeed, even though I knew she would. It was just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a beautiful film, Daisy. Thank you so much for your time today, and congratulations on some really beautiful work.
Thank you so much.